What's going on, guys? Wanted to fire up the camera and give you a little bit of a walkthrough on my kydex forming process, specifically for this screwdriver sheath that I've designed and have been kind of tinkering with over the last few months. I recently made a video showing you this new setup that I've been working with. Still very new at this, still very much learning the process, but I did already have a request to show a little bit more, at least of the vacuum forming, so I wanted to do that today. And I think we'll just go ahead and kind of muscle through and maybe show a little bit more of the rest of the process as far as getting one of these sheaths put together. It might be a little bit of secret sauce, if you will, but hey, we're all learning together, so if I can help somebody else in the process, all the better. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Fair warning, this is going to be probably a little bit of a longer form video. I'm estimating probably at least 20-30 minutes, so feel free to increase the speed, fast forward, do whatever you need to do. You know, some of it might be, you know, a little bit of standing and waiting, but we'll try to keep things moving as we go and just see what we can do here. So first things first, I'm going to get my kydex in the oven, get it cooking and softening up. That's about a 2-minute process. I've already got some blanks cut out that seem to be just about the exact size I need for my mold, which is this here. This is a piece of scrap canvas micarta I had lying around. I went ahead and profiled it on my CNC to make what's called a split die. So it actually has both halves of a screwdriver sheath kind of on one mold or die, whatever you want to call it. And that's what I'm going to be forming my kydex around, and then we'll go ahead and, you know, process it from there. I'll show you that part of the process as well. But for this type of press, you typically do want to use what is known as a split die. There are ways to do it. Say you're doing a taco or a fold over style of sheath. I've read about how some guys just put a piece of foam, like kydex or PVC foam down here, you know, fold it over, you know, put your assembly in there and then close this and, you know, kind of form it that way. I'm not sure how evenly that works. It's not something I've tried, but this definitely, in my opinion, works best on a split mold or a split die for your forming. Now, this particular press has a silicone membrane. There's another similar process that does not need or use this. It's basically the same press that I have here, just without a lid. And what you're actually doing, you're almost using the kydex itself as your membrane. So you would actually cut it quite a bit larger than this, maybe give yourself a couple extra inches all the way around. So that'll go over your mold and have enough left over around the edges that you then put a square frame around it, press it tight to your vacuum table base, and then when you turn your vacuum on, it'll actually act like the silicone membrane, you know, suck itself tight to your mold. And I believe you get a little tighter form using that method than you can with, you know, the stretch or more stretchable silicone membrane. But the problem I had with it, the reason I decided not to go that route, is that it uses quite a bit of extra kydex, you know, that ends up getting trimmed off and wasted. And I'm trying to kind of maximize my materials here, you know, get the best price on these that I can without using any more material than I have to. And I do have a little bit of a lesson learned on that I'll talk about in a moment. But that is just another method of doing kind of the same process of vacuum forming that doesn't need this additional lid or frame or this silicone membrane, which is a wear item. You know, eventually this will probably get a hole in it, it'll wear out, I'll have to replace it. Not that big a deal, it's the cost of doing business. But I think in the long run it's still a little bit cheaper overall than, you know, having that extra material that you're going to cut off. And, you know, being real with you, you know, a couple extra inches all around, you know, it's probably not even $1 worth of extra kydex, but it is waste, and I'm trying to minimize that as much as I can for this design. So that's why I chose this method. But I do already have a blank cut. You can see it's just a hair bigger all around, where it's left to right or the width is just a little bit wider than my mold. I'll talk about why that's important here in a minute. But I've got my blank cut. I'm going to stick it in my oven, which is at 350 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm going to let that cook for right at about 2 minutes. I got a little timer here. It's like a Williams Sonoma like egg timer or something. It's got 3 separate timers on it. Found this at Goodwill years ago. I think it was like $5 or something. But I use this a lot for my kydex timing or other processes, and it seems to work pretty well. So we set that for 2 minutes. Again, I'm at 350 degrees Fahrenheit. This is 80 thousandths thick kydex. 2 minutes seems to be just about as long as you want to put that in there. Otherwise, your kydex does start to kind of shrink up a little bit. So you want to make sure, you know, that you're at the proper temps and times when doing this, or, you know, that tends to cause some issues as well. Now, one other quick tip, if you're using like a toaster oven or something for your kydex, make sure you turn it on and let it come to temp for probably at least 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes even. Let that oven soak, get the temp, and kind of equalize itself. Otherwise, you will overshoot temps, or you won't be hot enough, you'll be too hot. It just seems to settle in a little bit more consistently if you go ahead and, you know, let it sit for a minute and let it get up to temp. So I'm going to go ahead and get some gloves on. Again, this is 350 degrees. We're pulling out of there. It will blister you. You've got about 30 seconds to go. I've got, I think it's a 6 CFM vacuum press that I use for HVAC work, or vacuum pump rather. That's what we have hooked up to my press. I'll show that in a little bit more detail momentarily. We've got about 15 seconds left. And again, I'll tell you guys about a quick lesson learned while we're waiting for this to cool after we press it. So that's 2 minutes. We are nice and pliable. Gonna stick it over, roughly center it on my mold. Close the lid. Make sure my supply valve's open, vent's closed. And we're just gonna go ahead and hit it with some compressed air to help cool it faster. This is still pretty hot, but it's already taking a set. I'll let that cool inside the press just for a little bit more while the vacuum's still applied. Show you guys a little closer view of that. So it does a very nice job of getting all that detail pressed in. Again, is it going to be as detailed as if I used the kydex itself as the membrane? I think it's going to be close. I mean, you might get a little better detail. Some of that also depends on how your mold is set up, if you have any through holes to kind of help get additional vacuum. And my vacuum just kind of let itself off because we do have some, you know, slight warp in this frame, so it does eventually come loose, which is fine. We are set and ready to go. But just a quick note, you know, I'm trying to maximize material as much as possible. I normally buy my kydex sheaths or sheets in either 1 foot by 2 foot sheets or 2 foot by 4 foot sheets. And I noticed, you know, in a 12-inch by 24-inch sheet, if I tried really hard, I could get almost 10 blanks, you know, on one sheet, and maybe not have any waste left over. So I cut a bunch of these out. Problem is with the saw kerf and, you know, trying to get everything squared up and deburred nice. When I went ahead and did my press, centering it up as well as I could, you draw in a little bit too much material on the sides here, especially where this higher portion where the handle goes into the sheath is. That gives you a little bit of a neck down or a waist in your form. and it draws that material in just enough that when I put my trim dies on there, I don't know if you guys can see this, I'm sticking out just a little bit over the edge. Now this side is not too bad. However, on this side, I've got probably over a 1/16 of an inch kind of hanging out there. So I kind of shot myself in the foot there, trying not to waste material. I actually ended up wasting quite a bit. I cut all these blanks, about 20 of them or so, and really can't use any of them on this particular mold because it draws too much in here on the bottom, and I'm not going to be able to trim any excess off there. Not that it's not a total loss. I have plenty of knife designs, knife models that I make sheaths for that this will work very well for. But I ended up just making them a little bit wider, which in the long run, it adds only maybe a 1/4 inch, 3/8 of an inch or so to the width. In the long run, I think I have just a little bit more waste per sheet. Or 2 less that I can actually cut out of it. I think I can get 8 out of them now. Really maybe close to 9 if I combine 2 halves of the cutoffs. But just let that be a lesson. While I am saving a lot of material, using this method versus, just the kydex on the vacuum, I'm saving a lot of material, but you still want to add a little bit extra for waste if you can. You're still saving material. You might lose 1 or 2 pieces, but it is what it is. Let that be a lesson learned. So got my piece pressed and cooled down now. Just gonna blow some extra dirt and debris off the top of my thing. You want to try to keep your silicone as clean as you can. You don't want anything getting pressed into it that's going to make a little tear or hole and compromise your vacuum, on your next form. So try to keep it as clean as you can. Take this out, blow the dust off it. Now here's our very nice and defined mold. As you can see. Now what we're gonna do, got a couple things we need to do. I've got a couple of trim dies that I'm eventually gonna put in place like this. And then I'm gonna split these 2 pieces apart and route the excess material off with a flush trim router. But before I do that, I want to go ahead and drill my holes in. So I've made a separate mold, which I'll show here at the drill press. We've got a few things going on here. So this is a separate mold, pretty much identical, but I went ahead and drilled my hole locations out, and I've had these are actually some homemade drill bushings just to make this last a little longer. I had some W1 drill rod that I made these 1/4 inch bit drill bushings out of, and they seem to work very well. Hardened to about 62 Rockwell. These things will last probably close to forever. And that's going to be just a little template for drilling through and getting my hole positions. So what I'm going to do here is put this in place. And then I have kind of a spacer here just to help hold it tight to the bottom, because I'm going to be drilling from the back here. And one alternative I'll just mention real quickly to you guys, if you don't want to make a separate drilling template, if you take your original mold, wherever you've got holes, and you just add, some holes to that. These are very small holes, 1/16 inch drill bit, I think, that go around this. These little white spots are where I drilled in the wrong location. I went and just filled those in with some putty or something. But if on your original mold you put these holes in place, what that'll actually do, I don't know how well this will show up on camera, but it'll make little tiny dimples in your kydex, and you could take a center punch and center punch at each of those small dimples, and go ahead and use that as a drilling location. Just a quick tip there. I think it's a little more efficient and faster if you make a separate drilling mold. And that's what we're going to do here. So I'm just going to by hand push this in place. Put my spacer on the back here. Then I've got kind of a secondary table for my milling vise. It just fits over. And this is just because my vise jaws stick up a little bit, so this tends to rock back and forth on those. This just gives me a better, more stable base to drill on. And I can move this all the way around, you know, without having to move my vise or my table. So we're gonna go ahead and drill these out real quick. So now we got 12 very precisely located holes. Now there is one little caveat to this, is that these, you know, I think when I made these, I didn't exactly center them up. So when I cut this apart and, you know, trim my dies flush to this and try to mate them back together, these holes are off in a couple spots by just maybe a couple of thousandths or a few thousandths. And that could kind of mess up my sheath when I press it together to bind things up. It won't lay as flat. It won't go together as smoothly as it needs to. So what I'm actually going to do is drill this out, each hole about an extra 1/64 of an inch. And that's just enough, gives me just enough play that my eyelets still fit well. But I can still center my sheath up exactly how I need to. Because if these two cavities aren't exactly centered on top of each other, the screwdriver actually won't fit in a certain configuration, and I can maybe show you a failed attempt at that later. But this is all very precisely put together, and that is on purpose. So we're just going to give ourselves a little extra wiggle room, you know, for getting these to fit correctly. I'm just going to grab a little sacrificial board here to hold this on. And one other thing, if you guys are just drilling, you know, into kydex, you know, this is now a pilot hole, so I want to use a regular 135 degree drill bit. That'll help center it. But if you're just doing a one and done hole, get yourself some of these brad point bits. They don't typically try to climb the kydex up the bit as easily. And you're able to center your holes a little easier with this little brad point. Just cuts and drills a lot better, you know, for single time use. But in this case, I want the regular drill bit because it does help center in the hole. So we're going to drill these out a little wider. See it try to jump up on me a little bit. Not a big deal, just something to be aware of. sure to get any little burrs off that are going to kind of get in your way. Maybe hit it with an air gun if you need to, get any dust off. But this is now ready for our split dies. So we're going to spin this around. And then I just got a couple screws that go on opposite corners. Mostly in the interest of time. It's not a bad idea to put a screw in every hole just to help hold it tight, but I haven't found that entirely necessary. Just make sure everything's nice and tight and even. Sometimes I'll actually loosen these back up. Make sure I am centered. And we look pretty good. So now I've got my split dies set in place. I'm just going to split this apart. Cut a little bit of the excess kind of around the edges because that can grab on your router bit and kind of pull things around, and it's not entirely safe. So what very little we can trim off will be better for. Now it looks like I'm actually a little uneven, so I'm going to loosen these up one more time. Hate to do all this work and find that your die was off just a little bit. So we're gonna make sure it looks a little better. So I'm gonna use my bandsaw here just to quickly trim these. Rough trim. Alright, so we got just a little extra trim off of this. We're going to go to my little homemade router table. And you guys might want to turn your headphones or your speakers down. This does get loud. And just bear in mind, this stuff does tend to grab a little bit, and this will take some fingertips off if you're not careful. So, you know, go slow, be careful, you should be fine. got our pieces trimmed, flush to our dies. And one of these days I'm going to get a little better router setup than that. Maybe one that doesn't sound like an airplane taking off. But you notice I do have a table on there. That's just to help as kind of an extra meter of protection. Or not a table, but a fence. I've got a fence on there just to help as an extra layer of protection. So if this does grab, you might have saw it kind of grab and pull it a couple times, or kind of make kind of a loud, like snapping sound. That's, you know, all part of the process. Not the safest thing in the world, but you know, that fence gives you a little layer of protection. You know, that you're not going to go over the bit or into the bit as hard. So now we got our pieces. We're just going to go ahead and just by feel center these up. And most of our holes do look like they're pretty well centered up, so we're going to see how they fit with the eyelets now. I might have to run a drill bit through one or two of them one more time. There is a little bit of play still, just because of the flanges on the eyelet and the material that rolls over. So this is my press. I do recommend, if you're using the 80 thousandths kydex, get the slightly longer eyelets that are made for 80 to 90 thousandths. They tend to not want to split as easily, in my experience. So what I'll do, I'll make sure just by feel with my fingertips that these are still lined up with each other. I'm going to go ahead and do just a couple. To hold it in place. Now I'll make sure the rest of my eyelets fit in. Again, that extra 1/64 of an inch on those holes really helps take out any additional error, you know, that wants to shift this off center. Gonna check no splits. Edges are still flush. Now, I'm not going to show all this on camera, but I will still take a belt sander just to take all these slight little chatter marks out of the edge of the kydex, flush everything up at 100%. I got a little flashing to kind of peel off with my fingernail here. But let's go ahead and take this over to our screwdriver. And make sure we were successful here. So this is, in this particular model of screwdriver, the 3/8 nut driver side is the widest. If this is not put together, you know, close to perfect. Let's see if I got yeah, this one starts to bind up. And when you put it in all the way, it'll actually pull off your screwdriver. Then you gotta get a pair of pliers and stick them down in there. And that's just from having these holes just a little bit off center. This doesn't line up exactly with the other side, and your sheath won't work on the thicker side. So we're gonna try Everything feels good. And yeah, that's exactly the feel I want, exactly the fit I need. And again, we could flip the screwdriver over. Any configuration, any bit combination, it's going to fit in there perfectly. And I know I showed this on an Instagram clip, but this sheath is designed to work with a number of other Klein screwdrivers. So this is the HVAC, I think it's a 7, no, it's an 8-in-1 nut driver. Fits perfectly for that one. This is the original 11-in-1. Fits perfectly for that as well. Once again, in any configuration, even the thicker side. Fits really nice, really tight, but comes out nice and easily. And I believe Klein does have like a 6-in-1 and some other models of the same, you know, kind of handle size that this will work with as well. But this is by far my favorite that they make. You know, you can take the bits out, you know, on their own, stick them in an impact driver, you know, like so, and it's just really is a great all-in-one tool to have on you when you're doing any kind of work. So that's it, guys. Again, this kind of went long. I don't normally make, you know, 32 or 35-minute videos. Hopefully you learned a little bit of the process. You know, I'm sure I could edit this down, make it a little quicker, but I'm just going to show you guys as it is, real time. If you guys have any questions, any suggestions, you know, one minor room for improvement I know I could already make is if I redid these drill bushings to use this slightly larger drill bit. Maybe try to center them a little bit better, you know, when I was installing them. I could probably cut down a step altogether, but, you know, I kind of like it as it is now. It's just one extra step, you know, what, probably 10, 15 extra seconds. If I was making dozens or hundreds of these all day, every day, then yeah, I would definitely remake that. Another option for me would maybe even be, you know, to make a vacuum fixture like this for my CNC router, you know, position it, coordinate it, and then I could, you know, put the vacuum on this, you know, hold the already formed piece onto my mold, and then use the CNC to trim and drill. And that would actually cut probably a couple minutes off of each sheath. But that's a whole extra complication. I'm trying to keep it simple, keep it fast and efficient for me. Again, if I was making hundreds of these, thousands of these, well, I'd probably just get an injection mold made for one. But if I wanted to do it this way in my shop, you know, without making thousands and thousands of them, I would probably do that. Get the vacuum fixture, have the CNC trim and drill them. But, you know, that would take quite a bit of dialing in and, you know, some different fixtures and things I would have to make for that as well. So, you know, right now it's not worth it to me. If this design takes off, you know, we'll revisit. But let's go ahead and cut this guy off. 35 minutes, guys. I do appreciate if you made it this far. Hey, leave a comment below. Let me know that you're still alive. And again, if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, I'm all ears. Leave them below. I hope you guys learned something, or at the very least, we're entertained. So thanks again for watching, guys. We'll definitely see you on the next one.